Welcome to another episode of Scottish Murders. As promised, this episode is about the disappearance of Pat McAdam in February 1967. Now, this episode is going to be over multiple episodes, and I'm going to do something I don't normally like to do. I'm not only going to tell you about the victim, 17-year-old Pat Mary McAdam, I'm also going to tell you about her potential murderer. But there's a reason for this, which will become clear by the end of the episodes. But due to this reason, this first episode is going to be quite short, but don't worry, there's a lot more to come. Okay, let's get started. Saturday, the 18th of February 1967, the first weekend after Valentine's Day, and 17-year-old Pat McAdam awoke excited about her trip to Glasgow with her best friend, 19-year-old Hazel, for a bit of shopping and some dancing. Pat worked hard as a factory worker during the week, and so at weekends she liked to enjoy herself, with regular trips to the bright lights of Glasgow. Pat lived with her parents, Dad Matthew and Mum Mary, her two sisters Eleanor and Wendy, and her brother Neil, at Lochside Road in Dumfries, but her best friend Hazel lived about 16 miles south of her in Annan. And so early on Saturday, the 18th of February, Pat, dressed in a black cocktail dress, yellow cardigan, purple coat and black strapped suede shoes, shouted bye to her family, saying she'd see them on Sunday, slammed her front door shut, and happily made her way to the bus stop to catch a bus headed for Annan, where Hazel got on the bus and the pair chatted excitedly until they both alighted the bus at Gretna, about 8.5 miles or 13.6 kilometres east of Annan. And they began to walk along the A74, which was the main road from Carlisle to Glasgow, in the hope that they would catch a lift from some kind driver who would take them all or part of the way to Glasgow. This journey would take a driver nowadays about an hour and a half, as it's now a motorway with multiple lanes. But back in 1967, according to Wikipedia, it was a single carriage road between Gretna and Glasgow that over time was progressively upgraded to a dual carriageway, which wasn't completed until the early 1970s. So the journey would likely have taken a lot longer, especially if you got stuck behind a slow-moving vehicle and were unable to pass. It's not known what time Pat and Hazel eventually made it to Glasgow, but when they did, they had a great time. They first toured around many shops, trying on clothes, and Pat eventually buying a black patent leather handbag, before having something to eat, and then spending the evening dancing the night away at a dance hall in Glasgow. It was here that they met a group of young men and women who invited them to a party, an invitation they accepted, and Pat and Hazel partied all night, catching only a few hours sleep before eventually leaving the house party on the morning of Sunday the 19th of February and catching a bus to London Road, which is about 4.5 miles southeast of Glasgow and is also part of the A74 main road that would take them back home. And Pat and Hazel again planned to hitchhike. Having been up all night partying and likely not over-enthused about the long journey back home if they didn't get a lift, they were delighted when an articulated lorry pulled up right there on London Road. After a brief chat with the driver, the pair hurriedly climbed aboard, over the moon that the lorry driver had offered to take them not just to Gretna, where they would then have to catch a bus home, but he had offered to drop them actually off at home in Annan for Hazel and Dumfries for Pat. What a stroke of luck! As the miles passed, the trio happily chatted away, Pat and Hazel happy to be warm and dry in the lorry while it rained heavily outside. As lunchtime approached, Pat and Hazel began to get hungry, not having had any breakfast, and so the lorry driver kindly offered to stop at a roadside cafe and treat them to lunch, with both Pat and Hazel thinking just what a great weekend they were having. After lunch, they all climbed back onto the lorry and continued driving along the A74, eventually arriving in Annan about 2 p.m, where Hazel said a heartfelt thank you to the lorry driver, gave Pat a hug, telling her she would see her the next day at work, before climbing down from the lorry and waving as the lorry, with Pat still inside, drove off in the direction of Dumfries, which was about 16 miles or a 24-minute drive away. Pat never made it home. Pat's parents reported her missing when she didn't appear back from Glasgow by her usual time, after phoning relatives and friends and realising that Hazel had returned safely home, and a missing persons inquiry was opened. While Pat's parents knew in their hearts that Pat would never have taken off and started a new life, leaving her family without a word, especially as, according to an article in the Glasgow Times, on the 21st of May 2023, she had left behind a bank book which contained £50, which would be about £1,100 or $1,500 in today's money. However, with so many sightings of Pat being reported up and down the UK following an appeal, as well as a sighting being reported from someone who went to school with Pat, the police were not entirely convinced. In fact, it would take until October 1977 for Pat McAdam's case to be upgraded from missing to presumed murdered. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This case has so many ups and downs and twists and turns. Let's go back to when Pat was first reported missing in 1967. So Pat was reported missing and a major police investigation was launched, where police all over Britain were searching for Pat. The investigation included police interviewing Pat's friend Hazel and tracking down and speaking to those who Pat and Hazel had been in the company of whilst at the dance hall and the all-night party. It included, according to the Daily Record on the 23rd of March 1967, the launch of a massive poster appeal, posters that were distributed throughout the country bearing Pat's picture along with the message, "Have you seen this girl? Police are anxious to trace Pat McAdam, 17, who vanished on Sunday, February 19. If you can help, phone any police station." Police were appealing for witnesses who may have seen Pat after her friend Hazel had been dropped off in Annan at 2 p.m. on Sunday, or if anyone had seen a large dark-coloured lorry with a bulky load covered with green tarpaulin in unusual or suspicious circumstances on the Sunday 19th of February, with another appeal saying that 17-year-old Pat had brown eyes and a Mia Farrow hairstyle, that she had been wearing a black cocktail dress, yellow cardigan, purple coat, black patent leather handbag, and black strapped suede shoes. Police also travelled up and down the country investigating any potential sightings of Pat that had been reported. It included intensive searches along roadside verges, in woods and along riverbanks, and involved, according to the Daily Record on the 18th of March 1967, Alsatian tracker dogs being used to comb the undergrowth in a wood near Annan for 7 hours, an area where Pat had last been seen in the cab of a lorry, after her friend Hazel had alighted. It also included police checking transport cafes along the A74 to find the one where Hazel had told police that they had stopped for lunch. And it involved tracking down the lorry driver who'd been the last person known to have seen Pat alive. However, it took police almost a month to track down and interview this lorry driver, but I'll come back to what he told police upon being questioned. Pat's mum, Mary, told a Daily Record reporter that the whole family were so worried about Pat, that Pat often went out for a weekend shopping and sometimes stayed overnight, but she was always back by Sunday lunchtime, and that she has never stayed away like this before. And police stated that they would continue the search for Pat, but that so far they had found no clues to her whereabouts, and they expressed fears for her safety. Police did report, though, that following the appeals for information, there had been a great response from the public, with people having given details of the potential lorry that Pat had last been seen alive in, although it was stated that police were still anxious for more information about this dark-coloured articulated lorry. It was also stated that several others had come forward to report having seen a girl resembling Pat in various parts of the UK, which police were following up. I'm going to jump a bit forward here, as one sighting that really gave police and Pat's family hope came in August 1969 from someone who apparently knew Pat well in the past, who had apparently gone to her house almost every night when they were younger, someone who told the police that, "I don't think I could mistake her face." It was reported in the Daily Record on the 13th of August 1969, more than 2 years after Pat's disappearance, that police may be near to solving the riddle of Pat McAdam's disappearance, as she was believed to have been spotted in Leeds by a girl who knew her. Leeds is in England and about a 3-hour drive southeast of where Pat was last seen leaving Annan. 17-year-old Isabel from Dumfries was in Leeds for the day with a couple of her friends, and while they were walking along a busy street in the city centre, she said she came face to face with Pat. But before I could get a chance to talk to her, she hopped on a bus, although I'm almost positive it was her. Isabel was questioned by the police, and in light of this information, it was reported that Dumfries police had passed on the information to Leeds police and that they had switched their inquiries to Leeds in the search for Pat, with police saying that "we are treating this seriously" and that a full investigation is being made. Pat's mum Mary also said at this time, "I keep hoping she's still alive." Pat's mum Mary and dad Matthew had been doing a lot more than just hoping Pat was alive. They had actively been searching for her themselves, travelling hundreds of miles up and down the country in an effort to trace their daughter. They were following up on any and all sightings, searching roadways and speaking to as many people as they could. And one person in particular that they travelled to visit and spoke to really surprised me, but I'll cover that in the next episode. However, 8 months before Isabel's potential sighting of Pat in Leeds, Matthew's health began to decline under the strain and heartache of his missing daughter Pat, and he had to give up his job as a process worker. He then was admitted to hospital twice, before finally dying in hospital on the 1st of August 1969, aged 53, 13 days before it was reported that there had been a potential sighting of Pat in Leeds. Mary McAdam said that she and her husband had never lost hope that they would see their daughter again, but that, deep down, I think he knew he wouldn't. Sadly, the potential sighting of Pat in Leeds never led anywhere, and Pat has remained missing until this day. However, there is much more to this story, so much more. On one hand, I feel that one specific reporter for the Daily Record did an outstanding job of keeping Pat's story in the public eye, while being respectful to her family and not sensationalising the story. But on the other hand, I'm not sure if giving Pat's family false hope again and again at each new finding was the kindest thing to do. That's a question only Pat's family can answer. But I guess that's all they had. Hope. Okay, so that's not quite the end of this episode. I've still got to tell you what the lorry driver who drove Pat and Hazel home on that fateful Sunday had to say when he was eventually tracked down and interviewed by the police, almost a month after Pat went missing. It was the 13th of March 1967 when police finally tracked down and began to focus on the lorry driver who'd picked up Pat and Hazel and had been the last known person to see Pat alive. He was initially picked out of an identity parade by Hazel before being interviewed multiple times. In his interviews, he admitted to picking up Pat and Hazel in Glasgow and driving them south, saying that he dropped Hazel off first near her home in Annan, but going on to say that he then drove Pat to a lay-by on the outskirts of Annan, where he made love to her, before dropping her off on the outskirts of Dumfries and heading south. Witnesses had also come forward to say that they had spotted a dark-coloured, articulated lorry with a green tarpaulin over its load in a lay-by outside Annan, and that the windows of the cab had been steamed up. The driver repeated this account at each interview, and so despite the police having their doubts and suspicions, there was no body, no forensic evidence, and therefore no grounds to detain him further. And so the last known person to see Pat McAdam alive was released. But who was this man? Well, he was certainly no stranger to the police, with his criminal path beginning at just 9 years old when he received a theft conviction. This was followed by a string of violent offences, most notably against women. By 1967, the same year Pat vanished, he was jailed for rape and assault in Shropshire in England, and again in 1970 for another rape in Glasgow. His history of violence and his later convictions cast a long shadow over this investigation. But with no proof of wrongdoing in Pat's case, there was simply nothing that police could do. Oh, and his name, it was Thomas Ross Young. a name that came up in our linked or not linked episodes. I wonder if by the end of these episodes, you'll think he's linked or not to Pat McAdam's disappearance. Just a quick interruption to let you know that we're going to be at CrimeCon in Manchester on Saturday the 27th of September, so we hope to see you there. If you haven't got your tickets yet though, don't forget to use the code SCOTTISH at the checkout to get your discount. Okay, so just before the end of this episode, I'm going to tell you what we know about Pat. Not about the day she went missing, but what we know about Pat. And I want you to remember this. So we know that Pat was 17 years old and that she worked in a hosiery factory in Dumfries, earning about £13 a week, which would be about £200 or $270 in today's money. We know she had brown eyes, an in style at the time Mia Farrow hairstyle, and that she was vivacious and pretty. We know she lived in a council house with her mum, dad, 2 sisters and brother. We know her best friend was Hazel. We know she enjoyed dancing, partying and going to Glasgow to try on and buy clothes. We know she didn't mind hitchhiking. We know some of her clothing choices, as she was last known to be wearing a black cocktail dress, a yellow cardigan, a purple coat, and black strapped suede shoes, and that she bought a black patent leather handbag in Glasgow. And that's it. That's all we know about this 17-year-old girl who had her whole life in front of her, and who, after doing nothing wrong but enjoying a night out with her friend, vanished without a trace. The reason I want you to remember this about Pat is because in the next episode I'm going to tell you exactly what was reported about her potential murderer, where what he was like was covered extensively, even in a full middle-page spread, and included that he enjoyed going to the movies and that his favourite star was Doris Day. I know everyone wants to know about the people who do the crimes, but what about the victims? I really wish more was reported about Pat, what her likes and dislikes were, what her dreams and aspirations were. Like I said, there's so much more to come, including a world-famous clairvoyant becoming heavily involved, a black dress, a stocking, and a black leather bag being found during a search in the area Pat was last seen, with a newspaper headline reading, "These could be the first clues to solving the riddle of Pat McAdam," as well as another headline in 1972 reading, "Police investigating the discovery of a girl's body yesterday were facing 2 questions. Could it be Pat McAdam, or do they have another murder hunt on their hands?" This was following a body being found in a shallow grave in a field less than a mile or a kilometre from where Pat had last been seen. And then the newspaper headlines that Pat's remaining family and many throughout Scotland hoped would lead to Pat finally receiving justice were, "Police are certain Thomas Young holds the key to one of Scotland's most baffling cases, the mystery of Pat McAdam." And then, 72-year-old man has been charged with the 37-year-old murder of teenage girl Pat McAdam. Find out about all that and much more next time. Until then, I've been your host, Dawn.
Scottish Murders is a production of Clurin Town.